And by playing, just sitting and playing with it for a couple hours, you'll have a very intuitive sense of how the lock is working, which is going to help you when you're spending 5 hours at the door wondering what the heck is going on because the safe isn't opening. First time you open the safe, it'll take you quite a while. It took me, I think, 6 hours or so, because you're going back, you're charting, you're trying to figure out where you made the mistake and then made the other mistake, and realizing, oh man, I screwed up way back at the beginning, you have to start all over again. But then once you get a feel for it, once you get an intuitive sense of it, then you stop making mistakes. And you start getting it right, and you get your times down to 3 hours, maybe 2 hours, which is about what most safe technicians will take to actually open a lock by manipulation. This is why many of them carry drills. Now, if you're storing classified data, and I'm not talking about the kind of data like the kind of porn you watch on the web, I'm talking the kind of data of where your spies are in Soviet Russia or Iran these days. If the Iranians get at this data, they only have to take a picture of it or even remember who the names of the spies are in their interior ministry so they can go back and shoot the guys. They don't have to steal it, and they're not going to steal it, because the minute you realize it's gone, you realize you're going to call the guys back before they get shot. So you want to make sure that not only can nobody steal what's in the safe, nobody can even ever look at it without you knowing about it. Because the minute you notice, you can take steps to make that information useless. But if you don't find out about it, then you're up shit creek. So the US government realized this problem back in the 20s or 30s when a crooked locksmith went around robbing jewelry stores. And this guy had been a locksmith long enough to know all the little secrets of the industry, because back then, and even up until very recently, a lot of this safe stuff was considered super top secret among the locksmith community. The definitive work on safe manipulation, remember the stuff I just told you about, was marked, destroy this after reading it. The idea being that it would never get outside the locksmith community. Well, you guys are all locksmiths, right? In any case, there was this rather unscrupulous guy who figured he could make more money stealing jewelry than opening locks back in the 20s in New York City. And he went around, he would pick the front door lock in the jewelry store, disable the alarm if they had any, they usually didn't, and then manipulate open the safe. Next morning, or next Monday morning, the jeweler would come in, find all his jewelry missing, call his insurance company being like, I got robbed. They would come in and take a look around and say, well, they didn't bust down the door, your safe's totally intact, and we all know those locks are totally secure. And so they were very, very unhappy about having to pay out awards on these things where obviously the locksmith, the jeweler, was stealing his own stuff. Well, this became known that there was a possibility to manipulate these safes open. So the US government heard about this and went to the only other people who knew how to keep stuff safe, which were the banks. And for the longest time, they had been using time locks on their safes, which meant that if you came in on Sunday, you couldn't get the safe open even if you had the combination. If you came in during working business hours, the only way you could get into the safe, even if you had the combination, was to use a special Dropbox slot, which would only allow you to deposit things in and not take things out, which is very useful in discouraging people from sticking guns in the faces of your tellers and telling them to open the safe and give them all the money, because they can't for the next X number of hours, by which time the cops will almost certainly be there. The US government said, aha! We don't have to worry about those pesky Germans or Italians or whoever it was they were afraid of getting into our safes and stealing our secret information. We'll just put time locks on. There's somebody in the office from 9 to 5 during the week, every day during the week. So they're not going to come in during then, but they could break in during the weekends. So they put time locks on all their safes with the idea that from 5 o'clock in the evening on Friday to 9 in the morning on Sunday, nobody could open the safe. Because, whatever would happen, they could get to it on Monday, it would all be good, but anybody coming in on the weekends was probably a burglar or a spy who shouldn't have access. Great idea in theory. Unfortunately, Pearl Harbor happened on a Sunday. And so you had all these generals running around their offices being like, our war plans, our war plans, our war plans. Where are they? And these aides being like, looking really uncomfortable. And they realized they needed a better idea. So they got rid of the time locks and posted guards, and went to a guy named Harry Miller, who at the time was the head of Sargent & Greenleaf, the biggest safe lock manufacturing and design company in the country, being like, make us a lock that can't be manipulated open, but doesn't need those time locks. And so he came up with the Sergeant Greenleaf 6730 MP, which is now known as the 8400 MP, or 8400, with some modifications. The 6730 MP had a small flaw, which meant you could actually manipulate it open, despite all the clever design. The 8400 is a little more clever, and you can't get this thing open by manipulation. Why is this? Well, if you look at the cam on the back, you'll note that it doesn't have a gate area. Remember how I told you that the gate area is what allows you to map the wheel pack and manipulate open the lock? Well, without that gate area, you can't manipulate the lock. The problem is you also can't open the lock, period, which is kind of a problem if you want to use it safe. So the trick is that the cam is a clever little mechanical spring-loaded device, which has this little spring-loaded slider. The idea being that the slider, because of the design of the lock casing, can only slide away from the gate area at one particular point on the dial. And when it does this, the dial is very firmly locked in place. As in, you can't move it even enough to reach the ends of the gate area. You can only move it enough to retract the bolt, which has been cleverly designed to retract in less area than it takes to reach the ends of the gate area. You can't play with the slider because it's spring-loaded such that when it's triggered, it snaps out of place. It doesn't move gradually, it just snaps. And the thing that causes it to snap is a little fly on the center of the dial. That is that thing. If you take a look at this and compare this to most safe dials you've seen in movies or perhaps in person, you'll note there's a critical difference. There's this little arrow-shaped thing in the middle of the dial which actually rotates. That thing will only rotate at that one particular place in the dial and will trigger that slider to zip out of place and lock the dial in place just enough that you can't ever reach the contact points and you can't ever get information about the wheel pack.
No.
So what do? Well, if you're a Russian agent who's confounded with these things in the early 50s, you know, you get yourself, and I don't know why this isn't playing, come on. Okay, never mind, it was a frivolous movie clip anyway. You get yourself an X-ray machine or a little canister full of radiographic material, and you tell your buddy who thinks you're, his friendly bar buddy, but needs some safe place to store your canister of undeveloped film. You tell him, put this canister in somewhere safe, which you happen to know the only place he has a safe is the embassy. And he puts his canister in there without opening it, and you come in during the night, and because this thing is emitting radiation all the time and probably eliminated his chances of ever having kids, but who cares, he's just disposable. You go in there in the middle of the night and you take out your handy radiographic film and you paste it to the front of the safe. And you count off your exposure time, pull it off, go home and develop it, and bada bing, you have a very clear picture of the safe lock, including where the gates are. Nowadays, of course, you can use these handy-dandy portable package inspection X-ray machines. And you don't have to worry about getting someone to stick it inside. You just put the source on one end and the reader on the other, and you're good to go. So, US government found out about this, and so did the British government, and they originally had this brilliant idea. Well, these locks are encased to keep people from drilling into the sides of them in like hardened steel boxes. So we'll just fill the boxes with lead ball bearings. The lead will keep the radiation out, and we're all good. Russians came back being like, aha, we know computer science and image processing, and worked out a way to process their images and still get useful information. So the US government came back with plastic wheels, which of course don't show up on X-ray machines. And rumor has it that the Russians came back with even better computers and even better image processing and still get in, so now they just try to keep the Russians out entirely. Now, of course, Hollywood is Hollywood. This is only relevant to the clip that didn't work, so I'm going to skip it. The robot dialer, this is, you're confounded with this lock you can't get into or can't manipulate. So you're the safe technician sitting at a door, and you aren't bright enough because you spend too much time drinking with your buddies, and your brain's all fried. You can't comprehend the whole manipulation thing. Ugh. And your drill doesn't work because the safe is a really high security design. So you pull out a robot dialer. This is a device which is programmed to try every possible combination on the dial. This is not, like it seems, the full 1 million combinations or 100 to the third power. This is more on the order of 200, maybe 400,000 combinations because of tolerances in the lock. So if you're lucky, the lock will open in about 4 hours, but on average, it'll probably open in about a weekend. As it so happens, and before I get to the next slide, I should mention this, some friends of mine at MIT figured out the fact that, well, these group 1 are the manipulation-proof locks with a little fly in the center of the dial. They don't work with most robot manipulators because the robot manipulator gets stuck at the little twiddle the fly part. So they built a robot dialer which could twiddle the fly, which happened to be only the second time anybody in the world has ever done this as far as I know, and the first time the US government kindly asked them, please don't ever tell anybody about this or we won't buy your products ever again. So this is the only publicly available robot dialer that exists that can do this. And if you check Google, you can find it. If you're a little more intelligent, you build a more intelligent robot. This was actually built by the same company that built that very first autodialer capable of doing manipulation-proof locks. This is a robot dialer with a brain and ears. It has a little piezo microphone which attaches to the front of the safe, and using precisely the same rules of manipulation that I explained to you earlier, automates the manipulation process. It'll open the lock in, 22 minutes. And I really hope this video works.
SNG 6730. The software on my laptop here is actually a prototype version of the software. But two of the locks I have on here are SNG and LaGuard. This is before they developed software for ILCO. And I have two different indications, SNG 6730M1 and 6730M2. That stands for Method 1 and Method 2. Method 1 is my preference for manipulation, find wheel 3, 2, 1. That works 80% of the time. If Method 1 fails or I determine that I have a lock that is going to be difficult to manipulate, I can go to Method 2. In this case, the soft drill searches the entire wheel pack. And it might look for wheel 2 first, then 1, then 3. It's a longer process. But between these two, it's just about guaranteed to get the lock open. So let's see if we can get a go of it here. I have two choices here also. I can select automatic or automatic with review setup. What I'm going to do is click on automatic with review. And what's going to happen is my soft drill is going to go in and check some of the characteristics of this lock. The sound characteristics of the contact points. Close to the same thing I would do when I'm first turning a dial and listening. Only what the software will do is throw up a graphic representation of what it's hearing on the screen. And what I have here is actually just about as perfect as I could have hoped for. I have an indication of the noise, the sound that the soft drill is hearing approaching the contact point. And this resounding crash of a wall here is the noise it hears at the contact point. And that's almost a perfect setup. We got fortunate here. What I want to see is about the right third of my screen. Black would be perfect in an absolute perfect world. I want to see the sound lines go all the way to the top and bottom of the graph and be as dark as can be. And I want as little noise as possible to the left of that, filling up about 2/3 of the screen. That's a good setup. If I get a poor setup, I have a few options. I can move the microphone and try different areas on the safe, or I can actually adjust my gain, decrease the position that the drive cam is hearing the contact point. I can make some changes here, but I find that generally I don't have to do anything. So I will click on Continue Test here. Next thing the software will do is run through a short series of pre-programmed common combinations, 50, 25, 50, 10, 20, 30, 25, 50, 75. And even though a good manipulator would try these combinations first, you'd be surprised that you still run into safes that are set on these simple combinations. So it'll spend just maybe a minute doing that and then go on to its